see those programs cut.
Thank you, Mr. McCaul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. Our trip to Latin America was very insightful at a very critical time. I mean, we do have a crisis at the border, 100,000 per month. But I think it's kind of a two-front war approach, if you will. I mean, Mr. Kowalski, you and I worked on Border Patrol issues for a long time, and Roberta, Ambassador, we dealt with State Department, state and law enforcement working together. That's always kind of the key, I've always thought. The chairman and I had actually talked about, before this trip and before the president's announcement, sort of putting the Central American Regional Security Initiative on steroids. Now, we saw Plan Colombia work. We saw Merida, Ambassador Jacobson, have an impact. And I don't think you can ignore the root causes of the problem. You can be reactionary and build a wall and stop people from coming into the United States. And we can have law enforcement and Border Patrol, which is essential. But you also have to deal with the root cause of the problem. What is causing this phenomena? I mean, when I was a federal prosecutor and chairman of Homeland, I mean, it went from the 20-year-old male trying to smuggle drugs, maybe get a job, to these family units. What causes a family to want to leave their country and come up the long, dangerous journey? And I think a lot of it has to do with conditions: poverty, violence, gangs, causes this impact. And I think, to the chairman's point, if we withdraw from the region, who's going to fill it? China. We were in El Salvador. The incoming president said the current president wanted to invite China to take two of their ports, bring their workers in, take over, and bring their 5G into El Salvador. That's a takeover. I think this assistance, USAID, we saw at-risk youths that were targeted that could go to MS-13 get trained to find a job instead. We saw the INL program, law enforcement. This is what is, from a law enforcement guy, most deeply disturbing, is that we're going to cut off our international law enforcement apparatus in Central America. So our FBI and DEA are going to be shut down. They will not be able to conduct investigations where they have arrested and indicted MS-13. How does that make the situation better? If we cut that program, cut it off at its knees, how does that make us safer as a nation? I think it makes it more dangerous as a nation. And maybe I'm pontificating, but as Roberta knows, I'm very passionate about Latin America. I think we've ignored Latin America for a long time. We got a crisis in Venezuela. We also have a historic opportunity there as well. We got to play this one right. But I think this decision, while it does sound appealing, you're sending all these people, just cut off foreign assistance. I think as a policymaker, we have to look at what the consequences will be. What is in reality going to happen if we cut all foreign assistance off to these countries? So I'll leave that as a question, I guess, to the three of you, if you wouldn't mind responding to that.
Ranking Member McCaul, thank you. And I think you and I have worked together on this issue for quite a long time in Mexico, in Central America. And frankly, Gil Kerlikowske was one of the finest public servants I've worked with. We really were a team when we worked on these issues. And since I worked for Roger, I know that we worked on these very same issues as well, across the aisle as well as across administrations. You have one of the things that really worries me about reduction of aid is you have governments in these countries of varying qualities for partnership, and I'm the first to admit that. There are deep and abiding corruption issues. But with our aid comes great pressure to improve transparency and make sure that government resources are spent on what they should be and go to the people, and less gets siphoned off, not of our aid money because we're careful with that, but of their own resources. We also work with the private sector, and one of the most successful things that we've done over the last couple of years is create matching programs, where the local private sector puts in at least $1 for every dollar the U.S. government puts in. What happens to those programs? They won't sustain them. The local private sectors will not sustain those programs without our government being part of them. Those have been critical as well. So the multiplier effect of a cutoff of aid, because of the local governments not doing what they should with the money and the local private sector not partnering with us, is really quite dramatic.
May I jump in for 30 seconds on this score and address several of the issues? The Chinese couldn't replace all of this aid with the stroke of a pen. And they will send that message to the leaders in the region that they are their partners. The Chinese have a very mercantile vision of the world, how they do business. They will not, for example, when they're investing to the extent they do in the region, have the same commitment we have in terms of environment or workers' rights, labor rights that are instilled in the CAFTA agreement. They will not certainly share our interests to inculcate a free market, private sector-led economy. And we talk about these countries now as recipients of aid, as if they were mendicant nations. But in point of fact, 10 years ago, we were talking about them as economic partners, natural market for our goods, a place where our companies could invest and make a fair return on that investment, build a safer neighborhood as part of an economic community. We've lost that in large measure because of the institutions in Central America being destroyed by transnational organized crime, caught in a vice between Mexico, where they were making at a certain point effective efforts against drug trafficking, and Colombia and Plan Colombia, which pushed these transnational organized crime groups, these narco-trafficking groups, into fertile territory where these relatively small countries did not have the capacity to resist, did not have the strong democratic institutions, did not have the accountability and the commitment to the rule of law to fend off this threat. And so the demand for illegal drugs from this country has destroyed those countries. And we have a moral responsibility, I believe, to help them pull out of the dive caused by that institutional destruction. We should also think about what we can do to restore the idea of a productive economy, not just deal with them as these poor, desperate countries that need our help, but insist that they reform their economies, insist that they deal with corruption, insist that they deal with the ability of companies to invest or trade, and do so as a good partner. The announcement that we were summarily and arbitrarily cutting off aid does not help any of these leaders be a friend of the United States. It embarrasses them before their own people. It undermines the confidence that we need to have as partners.
Mr. Kulikowski.
Just one quick comment. I would also tell you that although our demand for drugs is certainly a driver, every one of these countries has a drug problem within the countries, and they have recognized that, whether it's Mexico under the former First Lady, Margarita Zavala, and many other countries. So the problem of the drug trafficking doesn't exist just here and fund the narco traffickers. They also have their own drug issues, and they need to be addressed, and we can help them because in many ways we've made some progress on our our own demand.
Can I just ask you this, 'cause you as a CBP guy, and we've known each other for a long time. What, if we cut off INL, the international law enforcement, if we cut off the FBI and DEA's operations in Central America to investigate, arrest, and indict MS-13, I mean, this is we can talk about USAID, but the INL piece under state, what are the consequences of that?
So all of these U.S. law enforcement boots on the ground in those countries and the liaisons are covered under the auspices of the State Department and as a result of that funding. I don't think there's any of the boots on the ground, those working law enforcement professionals that are in there and doing that work. I don't think a single one would tell you that it is not worthwhile, that they haven't seen progress made, and that the work they're doing there not only improves the safety and security in that country, it really makes our own cities and counties safer.
And the chairman and I met with them and saw it firsthand, and I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McCaul. Mr. Seres,